Appreciate it. And thanks everyone for being here tonight. Tonight's workshop is all about audience-centric brand positioning. And you might wonder what that is. So hold on, wait. So I'm going to start by talking about what an audience-centric brand is. Really, audience-centric brand is what all of us should strive as a brand in business. It's very basically about building your brand and business around the needs of your target audience. You say like, wow, well, of course, don't we all do that? But the reality is a lot of us kind of fall into this trap of thinking about what we want to say, what we want to build. And it's actually a real problem in our area. I mean, VCs actually, and even angels have a bit of a bias in this area that a lot of us start with the tech and then try to make the tech into something where the West Coast has a better reputation of starting with the problem. And when you start with the problem, you are building an audience-centric brand and business to begin with. That is because people come to know brands by the problem they solve. If you think about a brand that has some meaning to you, there was some problem that they solved for you at some point. And if you can figure out the problem that your startup is solving, that is the most efficient path to not just get into their minds, but get into their hearts as well. Now, in order to do this, it needs to be something that is very simple, needs to be different, which of course everyone really focuses on very, very different. But as long as you are solving that problem and different, that's really the key thing. It's that relevant and believable. A lot of times people will just jump to something very, very different, and that's easy because a lot of you have a very innovative tech you might be using, so naturally it is different. But if it's not relevant or believable, it doesn't have even one leg to stand on in the market. And the way you get to an audience-centric brand is by strategic positioning. It's by clearly defining what you're going to be in the market, what you do, how you do it different, and why it matters in the shortest, succinct way. It's really about the art of relentless reduction. It's by defining the things that you want. It's by defining the things that you aren't going to target. It's as much about defining the no's as it is the yeses. And that is how you get into something very, very sharp. And ultimately, someone is not muted and has some really funky noises coming through.
Yes, if everybody could just take a brief moment to confirm that you're muted. Thank you.
That was someone's stomach. I want to know what you had for lunch. And the other thing is, once you determine what this positioning is, it's really about frequency and repetition. So it's like doing the diligence to establish what this is. And then until there's significant data that points to something else, you stay along that line. And I'll tell you instead, what tends to happen from a startup brand standpoint is most of you are, pushing something out there that's like this bed of nails. And, each one of these might be a feature or benefit of what you're doing. They might speak to different audiences. You might just have multiple founders that are talking about things in different ways. You have multiple decision makers and influencers you're trying to reach. But the problem is when you're trying to penetrate a market, and guess what? Every single one of you are David trying to tackle Goliath of some big meaty market like this phone book with lots and lots of inertia for however they're doing it. All you're ever going to do is skim the surface of the market. But the art of strategic positioning is instead crafting that single sharp nail that addresses a prioritized audience's deep pain, want, needs, desire. And when you do that, you can penetrate the market deeply, efficiently, and effectively. So how do you get to that sharp nail to avoid that multi-point situation that's just natural to kind of fall into? And that is by mapping the market across the strengths of what your offering is, the needs of the audience specific to the problem you're solving, and then what competitors are messaging and known for. And when you do that, you can find the real sharp nail that's going to speak to your strengths. And I know as an emerging company, it might be the strengths of what you can build, right? But it has to address an audience's problem, pain, want, needs, desire. And it has to be different than what competitors are messaging or known for. So this is a very pretty Venn diagram, but how do you now do this for your venture? And I am going to teach you in a workshop today how to do this yourself. And I would actually say that during this workshop, you are welcome to ask questions at any time you would like. I will prompt at certain times for questions specific to your venture, but if you have questions about the process that we're going through, you can ask that at any time. And I do see there are some things in the chat right now. Is there anything kind of relevant, or is it all?
People are eager to get your contact information so that they can follow up with you afterwards.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, that'll be up on the last slide, but if not, they'll definitely be able to get it. So, all right. So the first thing you need to do in the workshop is, just so you know, there are 10 different positioning platforms, and ultimately you're going to have to choose one of these for your brand and business. And each has kind of pros and cons, just kind of naturally, but ultimately in your market, it's really going to matter. Once again, which of these matter most to the audience, right? Which of these kind of speak best to the strengths of what you're doing, and which of these are not currently owned by competitors, either from an active messaging standpoint or from just sort of something natural they own in the market. I'm just going to talk a little bit about these. So first off, leader. Every single one of you should be striving to be a leader in what you're doing. I think that's a natural goal. But I always say leadership is something that is earned and never marketed. It actually is one of the least audience-centric things you can do, is to call yourself a leader when whoever you're selling it to has never heard of you or does not think of you as the leader. It really sets things off on a bad step. So when I have clients that are leaders, I say congratulations. We don't need to position around that. But it's really a common mistake. A lot of times emerging companies will they'll start some new category no one's ever heard of and call themselves the leader of it. And it really is a very disjointed and sets things off on the wrong step. Second one is innovator. Innovator is actually all of you, I think, by the nature, right? The fact you're doing this through university, there's probably some tech transfer. I think all of you are doing something very innovative and cutting edge. Like that's a given. But leading with the innovation and leading with the cutting edge and breakthrough nature of what you're doing has a lot of risk for an emerging company, because all of us make decisions sort of via risk mitigation. And the more you make the tip of your spear about how breakthrough and cutting edge what you're doing is, it actually becomes a lot less attractive to anyone that's not an early adopter. So what a trap people fall into is it will get you a lot of awareness. It's a great way to get your name out there. But what it tends to do is it tends to scare off big chunks of those early customers. So I always say you can fall into funnel mud by leading with innovator, because you get people that are like, hey, that sounds neat, but I'm going to let someone else try it. So that is one I heavily caution against. Expert is the idea that they want to go with either the company or the solution or the people that have the greatest amount of expertise. They have an absence of expertise in what they're doing, that they're looking for that. It tends to be a hard thing to prove, right? Especially if there are other competitors that claim expertise. It can become a zero-sum game. But for the right markets where that is a void and that's something they want filled, can be important. Superior product is a single positioning, but you'll see in the mapping exercise, it actually, because it's superior for a single thing, you actually map it out as multiple. Like you'll see I have superior blank. And actually that was one of the things that was part of the homework that went out is, for example, you might map superior speed different than superior ease. And ultimately you would just choose one of them, because as soon as you make a claim of multiple areas of superiority, you actually fall into that second to last one, which is comprehensive solution. Low risk is the idea of being sort of the safe choice. In a B2B world, it's kind of the idea that no one ever got fired for choosing IBM. You think of consumers, that's kind of like, you never go wrong by choosing FedEx. It's choosing the most common low-risk brand. A lot of times as an emerging company, if you're going to make a claim of low risk, a lot of times you actually have to teach the market about the risks they have by not making the step maybe to something more emerging or breakthrough that you're doing. Value provider is the idea of kind of spending money, but you get some sort of benefits from it. The easiest thing could be a return on investment. It could be you spend money to save money. It could be you just get a lot of value, which sometimes can be more qualitative than quantitative, for what you spend. Customer intimate is sort of, high touch service, concierge level, building everything around the customer. Um, it tends to be something that a lot of different brands claim, and it's hard to do credibly. And from a sharp nail standpoint, it tends to only work really, really well if you have kind of one or two brands that everyone's with in the market and they're really bad at that. Like if they have a reputation of not providing good service, then that's where you can lead. But if not, a lot of times it ends up being something that's ignored. Operational excellence is a wonderful one that a lot of times uh, doesn't get as much love as it should from companies, from startups especially. It's the idea of kind of engineering out the inefficiencies, making something very efficient and effective, but more on the efficient side. And I find a lot of times with emerging companies, they're going into a market where the current method creates a lot of waste, a lot of wasted time, a lot of wasted energy, a lot of wasted money, and that can be a great point of entry. Comprehensive solution is what I refer to as the great cop-out positioning, because remember I say we want to choose one of these. Comprehensive solution a lot of times when someone doesn't want to choose one of these, so instead they say they are multiple things. The challenge with that is the more things you claim, there's a perceived risk or perception of a lower quality. They really the audience has the problem they want solved, and the more you talk about solving multiple problems, they actually have less belief in your ability to solve the problem that's most meaningful to them. I always use the comparison of the Mexican restaurant that says they have really great sushi. You start to wonder if either one of them are going to be any good, and whether you may leave there with a vicious case of food poisoning. And you do not want to be the entrepreneur that someone is afraid of getting food poisoning from. The only time comprehensive really is audience centric is if the majority of people in the market, however they're solving the problem now, has X and Y but doesn't have Z. So hence the real problem they want solved is if they could get X, Y with Z. But I will tell you that's very rare. Instead, it's more the companies that are just hoping to sell a bunch of stuff, and it tends to be ignored. And low cost, I don't think any entrepreneur comes out of the gates wanting to lead with a low cost positioning, but I will tell you it's very effective, especially if the problem is that however the current method is being done is expensive and maybe people can't afford it or it's draining from other resources. Naturally, low cost can have a perception of lower quality, but it is a way to get a lot of the market's attention really fast. And if you do have quality, you can prove that. And it can be a great way to get the beachhead and then move into something higher value, like value provider, out of that area. So those are kind of the 10 at a high level. But then I talked about the map. And
Wait,
this is,
before we continue, I have a question regarding the comprehensive solution.
yep,
So there's like this like thing that I've seen so many startups do, that everybody's the one-stop shop
yeah.
for something. So I just wanted to get your opinion on that trend.
Yeah, so I mean, if you really think of it, like how many times are you looking for a one-stop shop? Like that's not. It's really what the vendor wants to provide, what the brand wants to provide, rarely what the audience wants to buy. And I guess what you'd want to do research with the audience. To me, if unaided, they talk about a top problem they have being, like I said, I have X and Y, but I can't get Z. I wish I could get X, Y, and Z all together. If they're not talking that way, you're dreaming of what you want it to be, but not something that is deemed valuable to them. So then you have to convince them that what they really need is X, Y, and Z together. But guess what? Like all of us as consumers, we're very skeptical of brands and businesses. So like, what's the value to me in having those three things together? I know the value to you, right? You're going to sell more stuff, but what's the value to me? So
Mm.
unless it's something that they have in their minds already, it can be a really uphill way to go to market. And like I said, it's a cop out. It actually shows you did not do the work of strategic positioning to really determine what nail. Right? It's the bed of nails if you think of it. Right?
Mm.
It's the old better, faster, cheaper, or whatever the things you're putting together. So.
Okay.
Um,
Just that I've seen it everywhere.
Yeah, well, it's a cop out, right? This is hard work, right? Choosing one thing's hard work. It's a lot easier if you have three founders. It's a lot easier. Well, founder number one wants it to be low risk, and founder number two wants it to be customer intimate, and founder. So all of a sudden you say like, hey, we can solve a bunch of problems. We can be your one stop shop, and you go into the market, and it's just you're only skimming the surface of the market. You're never gonna make that efficient penetration that you need to make as an emerging company in order to hit whatever milestones you need to try to hit. Okay, awesome. All right, so this is the map. This was given to you in the homework that was handed out. This is, I like to say, this is a little bit of my special sauce, but here I am giving it to you for free. What you're gonna do, you're gonna take this map and you're gonna map your market across what matters most to your audience and what competitors are messaging and known for. And you see those superior blanks. That's once again, as you see needs of the audience or what competitors are messaging, things that are areas of superiority, you would fill those in and map those. So I think I had this in the homework, but I think I want to spend some time doing this now in the workshop, and I'll be available to answer some questions as you're doing it. But what you want to map is you're going to map in green the audience needs. So the audience needs is, if you could survey 200 of them right now, what would they view as the most important of these to solve their pain or their problems? And the important thing is that this is not what you think it should be, it's what they think it should be. And you want to prioritize with a green 1, 2, 3, which of these they think is most important. So that's going to quickly show you kind of in a heat map. You're going to be eliminate a whole bunch of these because they're not going to be on it at all. But you're going to see, some of these that are going to be very meaningful. And that's great. That shows you what has relevance in the market. But guess what? A lot of times, what has a lot of meaning in the market, you're going to look and you're going to see, well, the competitors are all over that already, right? So you want to try to find a place where there's going to be some blue sky. So we're going to then take red and we're going to map what your competitors are messaging or what they might be known for already in the market in red. And I also want to make an observation that a lot of times for emerging companies, I meet with startups all the time, and they'll say who their competitors are, and they do like a Google search, and they find these, companies or brands that are doing what they're doing. But your competitors are who your potential customers are comparing you with. And I will tell you, in a lot of emerging companies, it's more about the inertia of doing nothing or the inertia of some current method or whatnot that is really your true competitor versus some other emerging company, that might even be in another part of the world. Until those companies or those brands you're getting compared with on a regular basis, those aren't your most important competitors. So think of your competitors of what you're replacing. And sometimes it is an actual company. It's actually, like, a lot of times that could be something people are doing on paper or something people are doing Excel or something people are doing manually, with emerging things. And that's, you want to map that on here as well. I know that can feel kind of funny, but if you think if something's manual, right, it's going to be low cost. If something's manual, they're probably going to think it's low risk, right? Because at least, it's the devil you know versus the devil you don't. But you want to map those as well. Now, when you've done this, we talked about sort of mapping the green, right to the red. I just want to show you an example of one that I worked with. So when you look at this, right, you see some green, you see some red. So what do you read on this? So in this market, the number one pain or most important thing for this audience in solving the problem was about superior audio quality. But guess what? Every single competitor was making a claim of superior audio quality. And in this market, it was really a zero-sum game where, what are you going to claim? Like you have like 0.5% better audio quality than someone else, right? It becomes something perceived. Plus, if you're competing against bigger brands and more well-known brands, you're just going to be banging your head against a wall to try to do that. So in this case, the second one, which wasn't a distant second, was all about efficiency. They had a very inefficient process of how they were doing it. They felt the pain of that. It was expensive. It was time consuming. They were hard to get the staff in order to do it. So in this situation, number 2 was clearly the most interesting and most, the most optimum, without further testing of a positioning for this organization. Value provider was number 3. There were some competitors there. Value provider is a great one because a lot of times it is something the audiences want, where like, the idea talked about kind of spend some money to save some money, or like get an ROI on it. What I warn people with that one is, if you're going to go down that road, you got to be able to prove whatever your claim is on the value provider. Otherwise, you end up in a situation where people come to you, but you never can get enough proof to turn them into a customer. So I actually want to pause here for a little bit. If some of you are going to want to kind of work on this while we're in the session together, I could give you like 10 minutes and also give you the opportunity to ask questions specifically about your venture and how you're mapping this. But I will also say that I am going to have some office hours set up. I don't think any of them are set up yet, where you will be able to, if you want, you can schedule a 30-minute with me after this. Probably not next week, probably the week after. Where I'll be able to, where you're going to show me the work you've done on this, and I will work to kind of troubleshoot to get you to a better place. But anyways, I want to open up the floor for any questions specifically about this, because this is the most important, step of it, because this is really going to help you kind of, without kind of your own biases of what really is most important to the market and what would make you stand out.
So just to be clear, we choose one of the areas of excellence that we saw in the previous slides. And
yeah, so they're all here, but this map is really going to show you which one is optimum. This map has all 10, and I know for those of you who are strong in math, there are more than
Eddie ơi,
10 there.
cái điện thoại của em giờ anh lắp kính anh lắp chưa?
Uh-oh.
Anh Thắng.
If people could please mute themselves, we would really appreciate it. Thank you.
I feel like my wife's a kindergarten teacher in the city of Boston.
Oh.
She always has to hold up these mute things. I wish I had her little icons. So.
Okay. Oh, so that wasn't your wife. Okay, got it.
So what I was saying is, the reason is more than 10 is because, in this case, right, we were measuring superior audio quality, superior speed, superior experience, which were all important to the audience. They're all green, but 2 of them were pretty active with competitors, and superior speed wasn't one of the top 3. So, if you have to go to something that's not the top 3, you can do it. Just know you have to work a little harder to get known to it's a lot easier if you think of you think of how to solve something with the 3 things that are on your mind. As soon as you go past the 3, then you have to really convince the person that that's more important than what they think is important. All right. So if we don't want to get into individual questions right now, I will just keep going with these steps in the workshop, and I'll let you all do this all in your own time. So once you have chosen one of these, the next step is to then start crafting positioning statements based on whatever the finalist one is. So in this case, it was operational excellence, but once again, it will be whatever it is for you. So when it comes time to craft positionings, this is the short, succinct message that communicates what, how, why, what you do, how you do it different, and why it matters. It will naturally, because of the exercise we just did, it will be very relevant to the audience needs, very timely in how they view of solving the problem. It needs to be credible. Credibility is a tough one, especially with something emerging and breakthrough. The only really way that you can test credibility is to test positionings with people. There are sometimes emerging companies where the audience has a need and you can actually do something, but they don't believe you can do it. So that's a tricky one with the credibility, that you really only find that out by putting that in front of prospects and finding out how they react. Because we mapped it, it's naturally going to be different. I will urge you in your crafting positionings to think about not just rational but emotional. The more we can connect with our audience on an emotional level, we all make decisions emotionally and justify them rationally. So if you make an emotional connection, it's going to naturally give you more opportunity to then sell the rational benefits of of the rest of your offering. And ideally, you don't want to keep doing this over and over again really frequently. So you ideally want it to be something sustainable. But I always say, as an emerging company, sometimes they want to position for what they're going to be in 3 years. And you know what? If you position for what you are in 3 years, but you can't sell any of that now, you're probably not going to make it to 3 years. So you do want to think of the positioning of what you have now, and then maybe how down the road you might transition that as your offering gets stronger. So breaking down the positioning, I talked about what, how, why. The what is short, succinct. I always say it's ideally what someone would search on Google for that's trying to solve the problem. So their language for the category, their language for the frame of reference. And I know a lot of us want to start categories, and that is an approach, but that's a lot of work. You know, like if you have the choice of starting a category, there's a hill over here that no one's on there, and then you have to put a flag on that hill and convince everyone to go there, where there's another hill right now where all the customers are. And if you go over there and just say, like, we're this category, but we're so much different than everyone in the category, and then you start attracting customers, and then you move over to the hill, is the better path, versus a lot of times starting with a category that they're not looking for, and you're the leader of that category, but guess what? You're also a category of one, so you're in last place, so not ideal. Then you get into the how you do it different. So the what you do is not the sexy part, but how you do it different really is why they should take notice. And then you got to have some benefits in there, so why it matters. So what's in it for them? And this is once again where I go back to ideally be something you can back it up. So a lot of times people make claims of, saving money or, return on investment. And as soon as you use that language, you better have proof, and not just proof that you think is good, but proof that will convince a skeptical person that's about to make an investment. And I just want to give a few examples of this, of positionings. And I also say, I know this is a business school, and business school gives you this like very rigid formula you're supposed to follow for positionings for companies that blank, we blank because of this. I always say that's great. It's kind of like learning to ride a bike, and you start with training wheels, but as soon as you're ready to start a business that's actually in the market, you can't be racing a race with training wheels. So I say draft positionings with real language of the what, how, why. Just make sure it hits the what, hits the how, and hits the why. And that's going to be much more engaging both inside the walls and outside the walls when it comes to positioning. And the position's really your North Star of your business. So it's really important that it's something that doesn't sound like it was written, by a scientist. So, all right, here's a few examples. So position example number one, stop waiting days for blood culture results. T2 Canada accurately diagnosed sepsis pathogens in 3 to 5 hours. I think it's a great example of an emotional lead. Talk about making an emotional connection. Waiting days for blood culture results was creating a lot of angst, with infectious disease docs, ER docs. And what are they doing different? They can diagnose the sepsis pathogens in 3 to 5 hours. And that actually was enough of not just how you do it different, but why it matters, because they were able to infer beyond that. Go Pure is a pod that you can put in a reusable bottle that it purifies water as you go. So this is Go Pure continuously purifies water on the go, ensuring clean, healthy water everywhere you need to be. And Voxelate was a Mass Challenge Grand Prize winner a number of years ago, I think even a little bit before Juan's time there. And they make 3D printers that you can print fully functional electrical components. So Voxelate prints embedded electronics right on your desk, translating your imagination into functional 3D prototypes. So those are just 3 examples. You're going to craft those positionings. If you are not definite, so when you were on that previous map, and maybe you're like, I want it to be operational excellence, but I also kind of tempted by value provider, you could craft positionings for 2 different positioning platforms and then validate those with prospective customers. Juan, did you ever do that? Did you do validation? I'm trying to remember. I feel like you would torn between 2
We did
things.
actually. Do you remember that Nico crafted an experiment, and then we went out of the WeWork? We were in downtown, and we interviewed people right around the South Station. I think even we showed you the results. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it can be a great way. So that's twofold. Like that's a great way to make sure you're picking the optimum positioning, but it's also a great way to get all the founders behind what you choose, right? Because, it's not just people's opinions, it's what's going to move the market. But for the sake of this, in the absence of that testing, once you develop the positioning, the next step is to turn that positioning into a messaging architecture. And that's, I don't know if you read the description of this workshop, it's about having a positioning that both connects and converts. The positioning statement on its own is that thing that gets people to lean in and want to learn more. But once they lean in and want to learn more, you want to convert them with the pillars underneath, with the reasons to believe you can do the one thing you claim in your nail. And I want to make a real clear distinction on those reasons to believe, because a lot of times what happens is you do the positioning, right? Like, so that company, operational excellence, you write this great operational excellence positioning, but then you immediately go back to the other things you want to say, and all of a sudden you have a pillar on superior audio quality, and you have a pillar on value provider, and like that, and guess what? You're right back to the bed of nails. So the pillars should be based on the evidence that's most important to your prospective customers to believe you can do the one thing you claim in the nail. And that's another thing that's great to do with testing, is you can actually ask them, you know, if you saw this positioning, what evidence would be most important to help you believe this claim is true? And they'll tell you the things that they need to know. And that way, you're mapping the pillars to their informational needs. I would even say, like, if you think of like your website, right? Your website, literally, this is almost like a sitemap for your website, because you can have that positioning. It's going to be that big engaging thing that punches them in the face and gets them excited when they get there. And then they have these other boxes that they need to do before they become a customer or a qualified lead or an opportunity. It could be like, what do they need to know? What boxes do they need to check before they fill out that online form where they know all of a sudden you're going to like start harassing them with email and someone's going to call them. Like, there's some of those things they need to know. And I'm going to give you the example for GoPure, like that pod, so you can kind of see. So when GoPure makes the claim of continuously purifying water, enhancing water on the go, ensuring clean, healthy, great tasting water everywhere you need to be, first thing is like, well, how the hell do you purify water on the go? Well, guess what? It's because we have this portable pod. It can be used in any reusable bottle, pitcher, or cup. It purifies and freshens water everywhere you need to go, and it gives you safe, healthy water no matter the source. And then once they hear that, then they're like, well, how difficult is this to use? Do I have to like change a bunch of filters in my car? Like, I don't know how to deal with that. It's actually super easy to use. You just drop the pod and instantly it starts this active filtration process. And you will never change a filter ever. You just have to remember every 6 months to drop a new pod in. And then actually the funny thing is third, like this category is all about filtering. If you think like Brita pitchers and all those different things, all of them were arguing over, you know, who cleans the water better? Well, in this case, because this can be done on the go, they don't have to get into any argument that they're better than anyone else, because right now you can't clean water at all when you're out on the go. If you need to get something from a water fountain or from a hose or whatever, you can't. So, but they do want to know that this is healthy. It doesn't have to be better than the other. It just has to be healthy. So there is, I would almost call this a parity point, that this pH balances and remineralizes the water for better health. It also neutralizes any bacteria, impurities, or contaminants, and it continuously works to preserve freshness and prevent biofilm. So this is mapped to the most important questions they need answered to help believe that you can make the claim that you're doing. So when you do that, then you have the positioning and the messaging architecture to connect with your audience and convert them. And I also want to make one final point. You notice we're really restrictive. We have these 3 reasons to believe. And you're probably going through this, you might have a 4th you want to add or a 5th you want to have, and the reason you don't want to do that is because years and years of Yankelovich research have shown that once you add that 4th support point, no matter how important you think it is, that memorability and purchase consideration drop like a rock. So they don't remember any of the previous things you've told them. There's no, retention of any of it. So you're actually better off having 2 than having 4. So don't do it. So this just kind of reiterates, no more than 3 reasons to believe, not what you want to say, but what they need to hear. Map that evidence, and that will give you something that connects and converts. And guess what? Then your brand will, and your business will connect and convert in a very efficient and effective way. And that's it. I'll just open up floor for questions. And actually, I'll throw my contact info up there for people who need it. I will say I'm just crazy busy right now, so I just might be slow in responding. But the best way to follow up me is actually to book an office hour, which I know will be coming as a follow-up.
Hi,
And I say
Brad.
office hour, office 30 minutes.
Hi, Brad.
Can you hear me?
I hear someone.
Hi, this is Karen. I'm actually listening to you at a Starbucks, so there's a little background noise. I wonder, years and years back, the movie industry would put subliminal messages somehow through their, pre-movie. And so I wonder, I worked in indie film, so sometimes you got to hit the nail on the head. Sometimes it's interesting to bring people in interesting ways, other ways necessarily. I think you need both in a way, but I'm wondering what you think of sort of these subliminal, when you see an advertisement, right? And they're doing something that you're not quite sure what they're doing, but then you end up feeling something and remembering the product afterwards. So I just wonder if you can speak to that part of it, and could that be effective?
So you're funny. This is really funny. You're gonna bring me way into my past, and I will say that I wrote an honors thesis in university on subliminal messaging, and my theory and my research at the time, and there's been nothing new developed, is that there was no such thing as subliminal messaging, and it was a bit of a hooey. It was actually the people that came up and said it was happening. They were almost like the anti-vaccine folks. There was no science behind it, but they got a bunch of people really scared that they were worried there was this mind control in advertising. But in the root of advertising, and as someone who, spent a good chunk of my career in advertising and brand development, there are no subliminal messages. People will take an impression away from what you're doing, and you hope that carries it with them, right? Something that's impactful will be memorable, that will stay with them. So then when they are ready to consider, or maybe when the problem, or they're ready to replace what they're doing, that they'll remember it. But that's very different. When you say the term subliminal, once again, maybe there's been some more research in the past 20 years, but that was something that came up in like the late 60s and early 70s, and like there were congressional hearings about it, that they were doing it, and it was mind control, and people were going to be forced. And the reality is, looking back on it, and I will say that I did this would have been in the early to mid 90s, that there was literally nothing there behind it. And as a marketer, unfortunately, right? Because if we could really put subliminal things in there that would get people to buy, I think we'd all be doing that. Juan, do you have anything subliminal in Waku that is going to get me to buy some more?
We haven't really put anything subliminal behind it, unfortunately.
But what do you say, if I may challenge that? I get it. And actually, in my undergrad, I took a film course, and that's what they were exposing us in the early 90s, I think. But these ads that you see that are super creative, I don't know if you've ever seen the Clio Awards. They are just really cool.
Of course.
The UK Clio Awards. When you leave this ad and they don't say really anything about the product, except it's how they make you feel, but then they put the logo, and so what do you think about that?
So I'll tell you, when I worked at ad agencies, I would tell you that the awards are really for the agency, not for the client, and that a lot of the things that win awards actually don't do a good job of moving people's businesses or brands. It's more of a self-serving.
Yeah.
And I will say, agencies, if they want to attract great creatives, they want to win awards, right? Because that helps get the creatives in the door. But, when I look at the things that are winning those Golden Lions or any of those big, global awards, and they all want to go and win them. But it's really not. If you really look at the things, that are really moving the needle and moving a business, like from, that they're considered this, and you move them to something completely different. I think of something like what Domino's did a number of years ago, where Domino's was like the worst pizza on the planet, and they came out with a campaign literally admitting that their pizza was cardboard, and they were going to change it. And they've literally moved the needle where, the absolutely has turned. Now, granted, they invested in the product and other things too, right? For marketing to succeed, it can't just be, and I would tell you, positionings, you do strategic positioning, this is not just about messaging. When you decide what that one thing is, that will also drive your product development. And I'll tell you, a big trap a lot of emerging companies fall into is you build the comprehensive solution because you can, or you talk to multiple people, and you end up building something complex that doesn't solve any problem particularly well in the market. So by doing this, you can kind of take down that product feature set list of things that you could be adding and instead focus on the one or two that move you further along in the positioning. And for emerging companies, it's about operationalizing. It's like literally every step within the organization, and the product. How can you continue to deliver on this better than what competitors are doing? And that's really where you build obstacles to competitors and build loyalty for your brand.
I have a
Maybe
question.
I'm just jealous because I didn't work for agencies that won a bunch of awards, but that's just what I think. So
I have a question.
Sure.
When you're differentiating yourself from your competitor, is there ever a time that you name that competitor and say that you're better than them because of A, B, C, or D?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky thing, right? Like, I don't remember if you're the bigger company, I never recommend you naming the competitor. Like, in that case, it's like, if you're like the smaller competitor and they name you, like, I'm like, thank you. Like, that I don't have to spend money on marketing this month. You just did it for me.
Good point.
But when you are the emerging, I mean, I tell you, I've had all sorts of success with that. And once again, it makes people nervous, right? Because, it might wake them up, but I love that. And I would love if if you poke the bear, they'll return the favor and start talking about you. And then guess what? You're now part of the 3-horse race and whatever that is. But I will tell you, like, I had a very successful campaign a number of years ago where, everything was built around the 10 questions your company X, or whatever the company was, sales rep hopes you don't ask.
Yeah.
You're literally calling out, like, ask them these questions, and that's going to deposition them. And guess what? That's also going to lead them to us.
And is there a fine line as far as, like, there's one thing to name them, but there's another thing to bring out how you're better because they're bad at something?
Yeah, well, I mean, you want to have your legal people involved,
Yeah,
right?
okay.
In terms of how you word it. I did a campaign for a PTC. It's a local company. It's a CAD CAM software, a whole bunch of other stuff, product lifecycle management, and they had a competitor that was really eating their lunch, and they went out with something, and their legal people approved it, of the 10 ways the company slows you down.
Right.
And they actually had metrics, that they had some third party measure and show it. But you got to be able to back it up. But I'll tell you, there's lots of ways you can deposition someone without saying they stink. Like, kind of like the one where, these are the questions you should ask them. And you give them questions to ask that it's really hard for them to answer.
Yeah.
Where you have really good answers to those, right? So, I mean, if you want to talk about consumer marketing, right? The Pepsi challenge was brilliant. Right? Like the blind taste test, and you show a bunch of people that think they're drinking Coke and they're drinking Pepsi, just to get all those Coke people to just, hey, maybe I should try Pepsi again. So, you can do it. Just get your legal people on board. But it is, I love, especially when there's a big competitor that the reality is the market isn't that happy with, right? That it's just a good way to remind them of that and then attract them to you.
Okay. Thank you.
One quick question, Doug, and thank you for the presentation. One of the things that you mentioned in the last slide was it's very important to say what consumers want to hear and not what you want to say.
Yep.
What would be the advice for us to really understand what the market wants to hear?
Yeah. So, I mean, the ideal thing, of course, is market research, right? And I think all of you as emerging companies, it's hard to do that. So I just urge, as an emerging company, try to find a way to talk to your audience every day, and not just like, if say you have one customer, you talk to that one customer. Well, guess what? Those early adopter customers, sometimes they almost become part of the company, but find a way to talk to them every day. Don't just talk to them about what you're doing. Try to get a sense of maybe the other things that make them tick. But that's the great way, because otherwise you can really fall into traps. So, and the ideal thing is you do some surveys, but without that, you just interview people as you can, and just try to keep your finger on that pulse of the market. every chance you get.
Got it. Thanks.
I'll go next. So we talked about the message, but what about the slogan? I mean, should the slogan say what you do?
So you're talking about slogan, you're talking about a tagline?
Yeah.
All right. So I will tell you, I'm actually talking to a prospect tomorrow that has asked me to do a tagline for them. And I responded to them. And I said, you know, name how many taglines you can name right now. And the reality is the ones you name, they're all big companies spending a boatload of money. As an emerging company, your tagline, your theme line, your slogan is really an internal thing more than an external thing. So I would not put any energy into creating one. If one happens that works, great. I would say nail your positioning, and if you can come up with a slogan that takes, the 2-sentence positioning and converts it into a few words, great. But I just see companies spending way too much time and way too much money a lot of times paying people to do it. Once again, I talk to her tomorrow. I'm going to say, hey, if you insist, I'm going to take your money to do that. But the reality is your likelihood of getting the market to think of your brand and that tagline, it's, you want to hope they remember your name and hope they remember that wow, yeah, that's the fast company, or, oh, that's the, in Juan's case, right? What do you want them to be? You want them to, oh, that's the plant-based beverage, right? What's the one thing you want them to know? So plant-based beverage isn't a slogan, right? They're really connecting you with the problem you solve or what you're doing different than other people. So don't obsess over it. Sometimes they just pop up and they're great, and then awesome. But it's internal. It's like your internal rallying cry more than anything. And that's saying that's not a bad thing. But just an emerging company, I wouldn't kill yourself trying to come up with what that is. I did a big one of these last summer, and I'm still working with the company to operationalize it. And for them, it's about superior flexibility. And we don't have a flexible tagline. Literally, I'm like, every day, think about how you can make things more flexible for customers. Every day, think about how you can make the product more flexible for customers. Every day, think about how in legal you can make things more flexible for customers. So it's the word flexible. That's not a tagline, but guess what? It's just, people, when it's simple, something like that, the one thing, it's easy for people to understand and galvanize behind it. If they wanted to pay me, 10, 15 grand, I'll come up with a tagline, but they'd be much better off spending that money somewhere else.
Of course, it makes sense.
So Doug, such an excellent answer to the last question. I was just wondering, and you partly answered this, brand positioning can also happen for the established companies also. So I'm wondering, and you gave an example of Domino's, and that was really good. So I'm just wondering, what are the struggles there, or what are the things which you should, take care of?
So I'll tell you, the exercise I do for an existing company is the exact same thing I just showed. The only exception I would say is if it is a brand that's already known. You saw the map of the 10 positioning platforms. If they already with their market are assigned one of those, but it's not the ideal one, you then want to find what's the better one. And sometimes it can be too big a leap. For example, this is an easy one, but if you're the low-cost brand, you're not going to jump from low-cost to leader. So sometimes you need to plot that you're going across the river. I'm going to go from low-cost to value provider, and then I'm going to go from value provider to expert or whatever. But you have to do that path. But that's the only difference when you have an emerging brand. And this can be a company. This could be a product. I do this for individual products, whatever. Sometimes what you're known for is the bloodiest of the bloody water, or it's not what's most important to the market anymore, and you want to go somewhere else. It's the exact same exercise, but you just want to make sure that your existing brand has the elasticity in order to reach wherever it's going to go, right? That's that credibility thing, and I'll tell you, when I do validation for existing companies, I do it blind. So actually I test the messaging with no brand. So it'll say company A or product A, blah, blah, blah. Because I want to find out what message works best. But then I'll get to the end and first off, I'll ask them, what company do you think is behind this, which is interesting because then, you get a brand name that may or may not be them. The last thing I do is I reveal who it is. And then I ask, what do you know about them? Do you think they can credibly deliver on this promise? And that's where sometimes it's the best positioning. The market wants it, but they hear like the brand and they're like, no way. Like that's big old slow company. They can't do that, right? So that's where the reality. You can't try to be something the market just totally discounts you for. You gotta, if that's the case, I mean that stinks. But then you got to find something where there is some credibility, and then build the bridge to that over time.
Brad,
Thank you.
I think that this could be so useful to nonprofits. It probably would have to be adapted, but I think nonprofits need this as much as business. Really, don't you think?
Yes. So, I think if you look at the 10 different positioning platforms, there's a bunch of them that you can just throw out, right? Like there are some that just don't apply. But I think with nonprofits, the tricky thing is really about the prioritization of the audiences, right? Because they have multiple audiences, is it about the donors? Is it about, like I did this a number of years ago for Jaws and Diabetes Center, which I know I guess hospitals in some ways are a nonprofit, whatever, but they had donors, they had the researchers, they had the funders, they had the doctors, they had the patients, right? So it's trying to figure out which of those, and actually another T1DX was a nonprofit I did this for. And they had a similar thing, right? They have the people that give them money, they have the people they serve, they have the people that are part of it, right? So like that's the tricky thing in that. And I didn't actually have that, but that's an important step in a lot of these. A lot of the times you have multiple audiences. You do need to prioritize the audiences in doing that map, especially for those of you, and a lot of you do, where you might have both B2B and B2C audiences. Because if you try to speak to so many and they have so many different problems, a lot of times you end up speaking to none of them. So you have to prioritize. So like if you think of our nonprofit, is it the donors that are most important? Is it the people we serve? Is it right? So like that's the exercise that needs to be done. So
thank you very much, Doug, for this
one more
presentation.
Can we fit just one more question in like?
Okay, we want to be mindful of your time as well. So go ahead with the last one, Sarah.
So I was wondering if you could share with us a campaign that you worked on that like really changed things for the company. If you can.
So like first off, yes, I did. I mean, I worked agency side and for brand development firms for no reason. I for 8 years have been out on my own, just doing strategy work. So I've done no campaigns for the past 8 years. Instead, I determine the positioning, and then I help operationalize it. I might help them hire an agency, I might brief an agency, but I don't claim those campaigns. But yes, I do have examples like that. If that's how you want to spend your office half hour with me, I'm happy to do that. But yeah.
Okay, well, awesome. Again, Doug, on behalf of the Innovation Center at Brandeis and the Spark program, we want to thank you for your time. This has been great. We're going to share the recordings and the office hours link with the attendees. And again, thank you very much, Doug. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Have a great night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Doug.